They locked the fat girl in Mountain Man's cabin as a prank. 3 days later, he came home. They locked the fat girl in the wolf's den. Let's see if she crawls back. Brett laughed, and the saloon roared with easy cruelty. By dawn, half the town of Timber Ridge buzzed with the bet. Clara Whitfield, soft-bodied, soft-spoken, and stripped of every scrap of dignity since the fever took her parents, was marched up the switchbacks with a sack of lies for wages. They told her there was laundry to do, floors to scrub, easy coin for a hungry girl. Then a shove, a slammed door, iron hasp dropped, and boots clattering away. She stood alone inside the mountain man's cabin, heart pounding against the stillness like a trapped bird beating itself blind. Garrett Wolf's place was built like a vow. Tight-fitted logs, shutters barred, a rifle rack silent as judgment over the hearth. Outside, the timberline moaned. Snow hissed against the eaves. Inside, Clara tried every latch and brace till her fingers ached. No use. The windows were cross-battened. The door could have held back a bear. Hunger gnawed. Fear gnawed harder. They said the man who lived here killed a grizzly with his hands. They said he'd snap a trespasser's neck the way a trap snaps a hare. Night fell. Then another. On the third, the wind died, and the quiet grew so large she could hear her shame breathing. She whispered apologies to the dark, to the floorboards, to the ghost of a stranger who would hate her by sundown. Hoofbeats, slow, certain. The latch lifted. The door swung wide on a spill of cold and the iron smell of fresh blood. He filled the threshold, broad as the doorframe, black hair wild, scar like lightning down his cheek, a dressed buck slung over one shoulder. They stared. Clara could not stand. The buck thudded to the planks. His voice was gravel and winter. "Who locked you in my house?" Clara's throat closed when she tried to answer. Her lips trembled, her hands clutching the skirt that had torn on the way up the trail. The man's eyes, storm-gray, steady and cold, fixed on her without cruelty, but with the weight of someone used to danger. I didn't mean to," she stammered. "They said there was work here. They locked me in." Garrett Wolf didn't move for a long moment. The only sound was the soft hiss of melting snow dripping from his coat onto the floor. Then he exhaled, low and slow. "Brett Holloway," he muttered, almost to himself. "Figures." He crossed the cabin, opened the shutter, and glanced toward the darkening ridge. "They think this is funny," he said, voice like thunder rumbling from somewhere deep. "Locking a girl in a man's home to see what happens." Clara flinched. "Please, I'll go. I'll walk down tonight. I'll find a way." "No." The word was calm, final. He poured water into a kettle and set it on the fire. "Trail's bad after dark. You'll break your neck or freeze before you reach the valley." He didn't ask more questions, didn't shout, didn't curse. He simply moved, silent, methodical, stripping his gloves, hanging his coat, cutting strips of venison from the deer he'd brought home. The smell of meat searing filled the small space. "Sit," he said without looking at her. Clara hesitated, unsure if it was an order or an act of mercy. When she finally obeyed, he set a wooden plate before her, half filled with food. "You've not eaten," he said. It wasn't a question. She shook her head. "I didn't want to take anything that wasn't mine." He met her eyes for the first time. "You're a guest. Eat." She did, hesitant at first, then hungrily. He ate quietly across from her, the firelight flickering against his scar. When she finished, she whispered, "Thank you." Garrett only nodded. Then, after a pause, he said, "You'll sleep in the bed. I'll take the floor." Clara's eyes widened. "I can't. You can, and you will." His tone softened, just slightly. "You didn't choose to be here. You won't be punished for it." She nodded, overwhelmed by confusion. This wasn't the monster she'd been warned about. He was quiet, blunt, rough-edged, yes, but there was something underneath that, something solid. When the fire burned low, Clara lay awake in the small bed, the scent of pine smoke clinging to her hair. Garrett slept on the floor, one arm flung over his eyes, breathing deep and even. She watched him for a moment, wondering what kind of man lived this far from the world, what kind of pain drove someone to build a life out of silence. By dawn, she knew one thing: whatever he wasn't cruel. Outside, the snow began to fall again, covering the footprints that had brought her here. The world below might still laugh at her, but for the first time, Clara felt safer than she ever had. By morning, the storm had thickened into a white wall that swallowed sound and light. Garrett stepped outside first, testing the air. The snow reached his boots within minutes. When he returned, he shook the flakes from his hair and said simply, "We're not going anywhere today." Clara, standing near the hearth, nodded. "It's all right. I don't mind." Her voice was small, uncertain. He gave a short grunt that might have meant approval, then began stacking wood by the fire. "Keep it fed," he told her. "This cold bites fast." The hours crawled. Garrett skinned the deer, his knife flashing in steady, sure strokes, while Clara gathered the courage to sweep the cabin and tidy what she could. Every now and then she caught him watching her, not with suspicion, but as if measuring what kind of spirit was hidden behind her quietness. By afternoon, the smell of stew filled the room. Clara had found dried herbs and potatoes in his cupboard and asked if she might cook. Garrett only shrugged, so she took that as a yes. When he tasted it later, he said nothing, but his bowl emptied faster than hers. The silence between them was heavy, but not hostile. It was the silence of two people who had learned that words often failed where simple presence could speak. When evening came, Garrett said, "If the weather clears, I'll take you down tomorrow." Clara looked toward the window. "And after that?" "You'll go back to town." She hesitated. "They'll laugh at me again." He paused, his hand frozen on the rifle he was cleaning. "Let them laugh," he said quietly. "They've forgotten what it means to be decent." She didn't answer, but something in her chest loosened. No one had ever said that to her before, not her father, not the preacher, not a single soul in Timber Ridge. That night she couldn't sleep. The storm roared outside, but inside the cabin was warm, golden with firelight. Garrett lay on the floor again, half covered in a wool blanket. Clara turned toward him, whispering, "Why do you live up here alone?" He didn't move for a moment. Then, without opening his eyes, he said, "Because peace costs less when you don't owe anyone." There was sadness in his voice, a raw, familiar note she recognized. "Did someone hurt you?" she asked. He exhaled slowly. "War did. People did. I stopped counting which came first." The silence that followed was deep, almost reverent. Clara felt tears sting her eyes, not from pity, but from understanding. She knew what it meant to be hurt by laughter, by cruelty that left no scars you could point to. When dawn broke, the sky was clear again, but Garrett didn't mention leaving. Instead, he stepped outside to chop wood. Clara followed with a pail to fetch water from the frozen stream. They worked in rhythm, strangers bound by necessity and something unspoken. At one point, Garrett handed her a strip of cured meat and said, "You work hard for someone who's scared of me." She smiled faintly. "I'm not scared anymore." His eyes caught hers. Good. That single word felt heavier than a dozen compliments. By the third day, when he finally saddled his horse and said, "We'll go down after breakfast," Clara's heart ached. She didn't want to leave, though she didn't understand why. As they descended the trail, the valley opening beneath them, she could see the smoke from Timber Ridge curling up like a bruise on the horizon. Garrett rode ahead in silence, but halfway down, he stopped. "You don't have to go back," he said suddenly. Clara blinked. "What do you mean?" "There's space here. You could stay just until spring. Safer up here than down there." She wanted to ask why he cared, why he'd offer kindness to a girl the town threw away, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she whispered, "All right." Garrett nodded once and turned the horse back toward the mountain. Neither of them spoke again, but the silence between them was no longer cold. That was the day Clara stopped thinking of the cabin as a trap and started to think of it as a beginning. Spring came slow to the mountain, but it came all the same. Snow melted in crooked veins down the slopes, feeding the river that wound past Garrett Wolf's cabin. The sound of running water filled the days, and the silence that had once pressed heavy on Clara's chest began to feel like peace. At first, Garrett kept his distance. He rose before dawn, hunted or trapped until dusk, and spoke little beyond what needed saying. But Clara noticed things, the way he always left an extra log by the hearth before heading out, the way he paused at the door some mornings as if checking she was still there. She learned to keep herself busy. She scrubbed the floors, patched the curtains, mended his torn shirts with hands that shook less each day. The cabin began to look like someone lived there, not a man hiding from ghosts, but two souls trying to make something gentle out of roughness. The first time Garrett thanked her, it came out awkward and quiet. "The place looks better," he said, rubbing at the back of his neck. Clara smiled. "You mean less like a bear cave?" That earned her a short laugh, gravelly, unused, but real. "Something like that." They fell into a rhythm. He hunted, she cooked. He built, she tended. When he showed her how to split wood, she swung the axe wrong and nearly sent it flying. Garrett caught the handle midair, his calloused hand brushing hers. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he said, low and rough, "You've got heart. I'll give you that." At night, they ate by the fire. Sometimes he told her about the war, not the battles, but the silence afterward. "Men shouted my name like I was some kind of savior," he said one night, eyes fixed on the flames. But when it was over, no one wanted to hear from the man who remembered what it cost. Clara listened. She didn't pity him. She just understood. "People fear what reminds them they're cruel," she said softly. "That's why they laughed at me. I made them see their own ugliness." Garrett looked at her then, really looked. "They were fools," he said. "Every last one." He stood and poured her another cup of coffee, the closest thing he could manage to comfort. Weeks turned into months. Spring burned into summer. The grass around the cabin grew tall. Wildflowers spilled across the clearing. Clara sang while she worked, quietly, without realizing it, and Garrett found himself pausing to listen. One afternoon, she asked, "Why do you stay up here?" He thought for a long time before answering, Because the mountain doesn't lie. Down there, everyone wants something from you. Up here, you just live, or you don't." Clara smiled. "Then I guess I'm learning to live." That night, thunder rolled through the valley. When the first crack split the sky, Garrett found Clara outside, trying to bring in the laundry before it soaked. "Leave it!" he barked, pulling her under the porch. She was drenched, hair plastered to her cheeks, laughing for the first time he'd ever heard. He stopped short at the sound. It hit him like sunlight breaking through a storm. Later, by the fire, she shivered under a blanket. Garrett handed her a cup of tea, his fingers brushing hers again. This time, neither pulled away. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked quietly. Garrett's jaw flexed. "Because someone should have been, long before now." That night, he didn't sleep on the floor. He took the chair near the fire instead, closer to her bed, but not near enough to cross the invisible line they both felt pulsing in the quiet. When dawn crept through the window, Clara opened her eyes and found him still there, head bowed, asleep upright, with his hand resting on the rifle across his knees, as if standing guard. For the first time in her life, she felt safe, not because she was hidden, but because someone finally chose to see her. It started with hoofbeats in the valley, distant, then gone. Garrett heard them first, head lifting like a wolf scenting danger. For days afterward, he checked the ridges more often, eyes narrowing toward the trail that led down to Timber Ridge. Clara noticed the change, but said nothing. One evening, as she kneaded dough by the window, she finally asked, "Are you expecting someone?" Garrett shook his head. "Not expecting, just waiting." That night, over the sound of the fire, he told her what he'd learned. "The town's talking again," he said. "Word is Brett Holloway didn't take kindly to being made a fool of. He's been telling anyone who'll listen that you ran off with me, that I stole you." Clara's hands froze. "Stole me?" He nodded grimly. "Men like him can't stand being wrong. They'll twist the truth until it fits their pride." The next morning, he saddled his horse. "I'll ride down, straighten it out." But Clara stopped him at the door, her voice steady, though her heart thundered. "No, if you go down there, they'll turn it into something worse. They already think you're a monster. Don't give them a reason." Garrett looked at her for a long time. "And what would you have me do?" "Let them talk," she said. "Let them show what kind of people they are." She swallowed hard. "I've lived through their laughter all my life, but up here, this is real. I don't want their lies to drag us back down." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, we stay quiet." But silence could only hold for so long. A week later, 2 riders appeared at the edge of the clearing, Sheriff Daniels and Brett Holloway. The sheriff was an old man trying too hard to sound righteous. Brett was smirking behind him, his arrogance shining like grease. Garrett stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. "You're trespassing." "Just here for a friendly talk," the sheriff said, tugging his hat low. "There's been talk that you've got the Whitfield girl holed up here against her will." Garrett's voice dropped to a growl. "She's not holed up anywhere." Before the sheriff could answer, Clara stepped outside. Her dress was plain, her hands dusted with flour, but she carried herself taller than either man had ever seen. "I'm here because I want to be," she said clearly. "No one forced me. Garrett saved me from your cruelty." Brett's grin faltered. "You call being locked in a madman's cabin saved?" Clara's eyes burned. "You locked me there, you and your friends. You thought it was funny." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably, but Brett scoffed. "You're lying." Garrett moved closer, his shadow falling over Brett. "Careful, boy. You're not good at that." Brett took a step back but hissed, "She's just a fat liar trying to trap you." That word, fat, hung in the air, ugly and familiar. Clara flinched, but only for a heartbeat. Then she straightened. "You know what's funny, Brett," she said, her voice calm, shaking only a little. "You used to laugh because I was alone, because I was weak. But now I'm not either of those things, and you can't stand it." Garrett's hand tightened on the rifle. The sheriff raised a placating hand. "That's enough." "No," Garrett said, voice quiet, but deadly. "It's not." He stepped closer until he stood toe to toe with Brett. "You come up here again, Holloway, and you'll find out why they call me Wolf." The men left soon after, muttering threats that melted into the wind. That night, Clara found Garrett outside, sharpening his knife under the stars. "They won't stop, will they?" she asked. "No," he said simply. "Men like him never stop until they're forced to." "Then let me stand with you," she said. "I'm not hiding any more." He looked at her, eyes glinting in the firelight. "You've got more courage than anyone I've met." Clara smiled softly. "Maybe I've finally learned it from the right person." The mountain was quiet again, but beneath its peace, something was shifting. The world below was stirring, and soon their fragile sanctuary would be tested. The sun dipped low behind the ridge when Garrett knew it was coming. The mountain goes quiet before trouble. The birds vanish. The wind holds its breath. He loaded his rifle, slow and sure, the sound of the metal clicking into place echoing in the stillness. Clara stood by the window, her hands gripping the frame. "How many?" "3, maybe 4, Garrett said. "Brett's not stupid enough to come alone." Her throat tightened. "Then I'm not hiding." He turned sharply. "Clara!" "No." Her voice was steady now. "They've taken enough from me. My peace, my name, my dignity. I won't let them take my home, too." Garrett's gaze held hers for a long moment, then softened. "All right. Stay close. Don't do anything reckless." But Clara had already decided she would not be small again. The sound came first. Hooves crunching through frozen mud, men shouting, the faint gleam of lanterns cutting through the dusk. Brett's voice carried through the trees. "Come out, Wolf. We know she's in there. You can't hide your little pet forever." Garrett stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. The men reined in their horses just short of the clearing. "You've got one chance to turn around," he called, calm but thunder quiet. "Do it while you still can." Brett laughed, though it sounded hollow. "You think you can scare us? You're nothing but a crazy hermit with a gun and a fat thief for company." Garrett's jaw clenched, but before he could speak, Clara pushed open the door. Her voice cut through the night, clear as a bell. "Don't you dare call me that again." Every man on horseback turned to look. She walked forward, the firelight spilling over her face, her shoulders straight despite the tremor in her hands. "I was never your joke," she said, her voice trembling with fury and truth. "You locked me away because you were afraid of me, afraid of the way my kindness made you feel small. But I'm done being your entertainment, Brett Holloway." Brett's sneer faltered. "Go back inside, Clara. You don't know what you're saying." "Oh, I do." She stepped closer. "You can laugh at me all you want, but you don't own me. You don't own anything here. This mountain, this home, belongs to someone braver than you'll ever be." Garrett moved beside her, silent and steady, the rifle lowered, but ready. "You heard her," he said softly. "Ride, now." For a moment, Brett hesitated, torn between pride and fear. Then from the shadows, another voice rang out. Sheriff Daniels, his badge catching the lantern light. "That's enough, Holloway." Brett froze. The sheriff rode forward, his tone sharp. "I warned you last time. You step on this man's land again, you answer to the law." The color drained from Brett's face. "You're taking her word over mine?" "I'm taking the truth over your lies," the sheriff said. "Now get off this mountain." Brett's jaw worked, but he turned his horse, spitting into the dirt. "This isn't over." Garrett's voice followed him, low and final. "It is if you're smart." When the riders disappeared down the trail, the mountain breathed again. The silence returned, this time soft, almost holy. Garrett turned to Clara. "You didn't have to do that." She smiled through her tears. "I did. I've been silent my whole life. It's time someone heard me." He looked at her for a long time, then reached out, rough hand cupping her cheek, as though afraid she might vanish. "They'll never touch you again, not while I'm breathing." And for the first time, she believed him. Spring crept softly back over Timber Ridge. The snow retreated from the slopes, leaving rivers that glittered under the sun. Life returned to the valley. Birds sang again, and wildflowers broke through the thawing earth. For the first time in years, Clara woke without dread in her chest. The cabin no longer felt like a prison of wood and stone. It was a heartbeat, steady and warm. She moved through it easily now, humming as she cooked, her laughter echoing against the beams Garrett had built long before she came. Word from the town drifted up the mountain, carried by passing traders. Brett Holloway had left Timber Ridge for good. People whispered that the sheriff's warning and Garrett's silent promise had been enough. Others began to question what they'd done, the cruelty they'd called entertainment. Clara didn't seek their apologies. Some wounds didn't need words, only distance. One morning, Garrett came in from the woods, his hand smelling of pine and smoke. He found Clara standing on the porch, gazing at the valley below. She turned when she heard him, the sunlight painting her hair gold. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly. He nodded. "It was quiet up here before, too quiet. Now it feels alive again." Clara smiled, eyes bright. "Maybe it's because you finally let someone in." Garrett's lips curved, a small, rare thing that still caught her breath. He stepped closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Maybe it's because she turned this place into something worth living for." They stood in silence, watching the world wake beneath them. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, a promise that no winter, no cruelty, no laughter from small men could ever reach this far again. "You're safe here," Garrett murmured, his voice rough against her hair. Clara leaned into him. "I know. I'm home." Every story like Clara's reminds us that strength doesn't always roar. It sometimes whispers, quietly, through kindness that refuses to die. She was mocked for her size, abandoned for her softness, and yet she built a life on the mountain that cruelty could never touch. If you're listening to this tonight, maybe from a city far from any snow, maybe somewhere no one really sees you, remember this: you are not what they call you. You are what you survive. Tell me, where in the world are you hearing this story from? And if you still believe love can rise from the coldest places, stay. The next story is for you.